There's a kind of silence that doesn't bring peace. It's the silence usually after you've won. You've made your points, you've proved your logic, you got the last word in, and yet somehow the air still feels heavy because you didn't actually win. You just outlasted that connection. That's the quiet that men don't really talk about as much. They're the quiet that comes after that you won too many times, perhaps at work or at home or in love, and then you realize that being right has just left you feeling more isolated. The more victories you collect, the fewer people who want to actually stand beside you. And that's the hidden cost, I think, of being right all the time. You trade intimacy for superiority, and then you call this leadership. Here at Uber Bintegers, we believe that integrity matters far more than the ego does, and intimacy matters far more than control. Because real men don't lead from pride. Real men lead with presence. They don't seek to dominate any truth, they just seek to embody it. And that's where maturity begins. When we stop using truth as a weapon and start holding it as a mirror. See, somewhere in the way we were raised, I think we in essence confuse accuracy with wisdom. We thought that being right made us respectable. We thought that our value lived in how much we knew, how clearly we could argue, how deeply we could win. And that's not wisdom. That's insecurity with a dictionary, right? Because wisdom doesn't need to defeat people. Wisdom seeks to understand people. Wisdom isn't interested in victory. Wisdom is far more interested in harmony. But most of us weren't raised to build harmony. We were raised to defend ourselves, even from the people that we love. I mean, think about this. How early did this start for you? Perhaps when you were a boy, you were praised for being correct, not for being curious, right? You're rewarded for having the answer, but not necessarily for asking better questions. And every time you admitted uncertainty, perhaps someone just made you feel a little smaller. And so you learned that safety, it actually lives in certainty. And by the time you became a man, you weren't looking for truth anymore. You were looking for control. Because control is this illusion that keeps you, it, it keeps your fear from showing up, right? And that's why so many men, I think, debate instead of dialogue. It's not that we love the conflict, it's that we're terrified of being wrong because being wrong feels like we are worthless. And this is what ego does. It convinces us that love is conditional on being correct. And so we stop relating and we start performing. We treat every conversation like a courtroom and every disagreement like a battle. We listen just long enough to reload. And then we wonder why people around us stop opening up. The truth is, the truth is being right feels good maybe for 5 seconds. But being real, that feels good for a lifetime. And most of us have spent so long protecting our correctness that we've forgotten how to be human. The need to be right, I think, I wonder if it isn't a trauma response because it's how we protect ourselves from the pain of being dismissed or misunderstood or unseen. And we say, if I can just prove that I'm right, then I can matter. If I can prove that I matter, then I won't be abandoned. But the real irony is far more brutal. The very thing that we do to keep from being abandoned, like that obsession with being right, I think is the very thing that pushes people away ultimately. Because no one feels safe opening up around someone who's always needing to win. They stop talking, not because they don't have something to say, but because they just know that they'll never be heard. And what's really the point of speaking truth if it's only going to be graded instead of actually received, right? We like to think our logic makes us leaders, but logic without love makes you lonely. It's the kind of intelligence that solves problems but breaks people along the way. And most of the time, we don't even realize that it's really happening because being right feels, oh, so righteous, right? So you tell yourself that you're standing for truth, for accountability, for principle. But often you're just standing alone. But here's what's real. Being right isn't expensive because of what it costs you to prove it. Being right is expensive because of what it costs the relationship when you do. And every time you make someone else feel small so that you can feel correct, in essence, you're bankrupting trust in that connection. Every time you prioritize clarity over compassion, you're building distance instead of depth. Every time you correct someone when they're being vulnerable, you teach them that safety isn't available here. And that's how we lose intimacy. Not in these big betrayals, but in tiny moments where the ego wins and empathy loses. Being right is a cheap drug. It gives you a quick hit and you feel powerful, but it leaves you feeling emptier afterwards. It numbs the insecurity without actually healing it. And once you get addicted to that high, you'll keep chasing it, right? Even when it costs you your peace. And that's why the strongest men aren't the ones who are always right. The strongest men are the ones who can stay rooted when they're proven wrong. Because that's what maturity looks like. Strength that isn't really threatened by correction. See, presence changes everything here. Because when you're present, you're no longer arguing to win now. You're listening to understand. And so you start realizing that being understood isn't always the goal. Understanding is what you're aiming for. And so presence shifts you from being defensive to being discerning. And so you stop fighting to be right. And now you start asking, but what's true here? Even if it isn't flattering. That's the kind of humility that builds trust. And that's the kind of leadership I would say this world is starving for. There's this illusion that the most respected men are the ones who never admit faults. Have you heard that one? But the truth is, the men who we actually admire are really the ones who apologize well. The ones who can say, gosh, you're right. I missed that. Or I spoke from fear and not from wisdom. I want to acknowledge that. That kind of vulnerability takes far more courage than any argument ever will. It's really what separates performers from true leaders. And that's exactly, I think, what I want to help you practice in this new course on my website, In the Ashes of the Alpha Male. And this is because real confidence doesn't need to be right to feel worthy. So in this foundational course, I want to help you spot where the ego hides inside your convictions, right? And we'll do a deep dive within this course to help guide you into humility as a new form of strength. So you can access that course on my website, uberbintegers.com, In the Ashes of the Alpha Male. But let me tell you something a few men will admit. And that's we use being right as a way of avoiding being seen. Because if I'm busy defending my logic, then you'll never notice my fear over here. If I'm correcting your words, you'll never get to see my wounds. And if I'm dominating the conversation, then I'll never have to face what the silence might reveal. Ego isn't loud because it's strong. It's loud because it's scared. I mean, what would it look like to stop defending and to start discerning? to trade judgment for curiosity, to stop asking who's right and instead start asking what's real. It would look like men finally learning how to stay connected through the conflict. It would look like leadership that isn't threatened by emotion. It would look like peace that doesn't depend on expressions of power. Because truth without tenderness will always break before it ever builds. The need to be right, I think, is perhaps one of the oldest forms of insecurity. And most of us have inherited it. We've watched our fathers and our pastors and our mentors model this kind of authority that never admitted uncertainty. And we thought that that's what strength looked like, right? Control through correctness. But the new masculine isn't here to perform infallibility. The new masculine is here to model honesty, to say, I don't have it. I don't have to be perfect to be powerful. I don't lose anything by learning, is what I could say. That's the kind of man who can lead without losing himself. So we need to start honoring the men who can actually say, I was wrong. Because that's how you build intimacy. Not by being impressive, but by being accessible. See, no one feels safe with someone who's always right. But everyone, I would say, feels safe around someone who's always real. And that's what I would say the new definition of manhood is really about. It's replacing the illusion of control with the courage to connect. Because every time that you choose connection over control, you're reclaiming the part of you that power had tried to steal in the first place. So here's, I would say, what it costs to always be right. It costs you softness of being known. It costs you the peace of being teachable. Like it costs you the intimacy that makes life worth living. And for what? Like to prove a point that no longer proves who you truly are? Yeah, you can't be both adored and unapproachable. You can't lead with love and live like a lecture. You can't keep arguing your way into connection. It doesn't work that way. Sometimes the bravest thing that you could do is to let the last word go. Because in the end, no one really remembers who was right. But they will remember who was safe. They will remember who could stay soft amidst that conflict. They will remember who listened when they didn't have to. And that's the legacy that outlives any argument. So here's my invitation to you, men. Let presence replace performance. Let humility replace that hierarchy. Let connection replace your need for correctness. That's not weakness. That's wisdom there. And that's what's waiting for us on the other side. On the other side of needing to be right. The peace that only comes when we stop performing truth and instead start living it. In tomorrow's episode, we're going to explore what happens when we confuse possession with protection and why men mistake control for care. That's episode 13. What happens when men confuse possession with protection? I hope you'll join me for that one. Thank you for listening in, and I will see you in tomorrow's episode. Do drop me a comment down below. Let me know how you resonated with today's episode. I could relate with so much that I was talking to, having to learn my way through it. So I'd love to hear your anecdotes. See you tomorrow.